This is from City Builders and Vandals in Our Age by Caleb Maupin. I am reading to you an essay from this book called Odinist America. Across the southern and midwestern United States, it is common at high school sporting events to see the players join hands in prayer. This tradition has even become the subject of court cases as it violates the U.S. Constitution for any public school or government institution to promote religion. Regardless, in many football fields and basketball courts, you will see American high school athletes joining hands and, led by their coach or instructor, bow their heads and ask for the blessing of Jesus Christ before they go out and engage in competition. Now, what purpose does this tradition serve? High school athletes and coaches will be very open and honest about this. The prayer is asking God's assistance in helping the players to fully concentrate, give their most full efforts, play to their best ability, and vanquish the opposing team. Yes, many coaches and principals have joined hands with football players and basketball players and muttered the name of Jesus Christ. But to those who understand the Christian religion and its history, something seems to be oddly misplaced about this tradition. Jesus Christ, let us recall, said that the last shall be first and the first shall be last. Christ's message and teachings have very little, if anything, advocating that one go out and struggle to the best of one's ability, put forth gigantic efforts in order to defeat a rival group of players in order to win a competition. But yet, many Americans seem to have placed this work ethic at the center of their worldview. Conservative American Christians have many misattributed bits of wisdom aligning such sentiments with the Christian Gospels. For example, many polls have shown that the majority of American Christians mistakenly believe that the often quoted phrase, "God helps those who help themselves," written by Benjamin Franklin in 1736, can be found in the Christian scriptures. However, if one looks into not simply the widespread interpretation of Christianity in the United States, but into the wider U.S. culture itself, one can see the unmistakable stamp of another deity whose ancestors predate Jesus and Christianity among the European ancestors of many Americans. Odin, or Wotan, the god of the Germanic tribes and Norse men, has a deep influence on U.S. culture. Thomas Carlyle, the Scottish intellectual whose text on heroes, hero worship, and the heroic in history, published in 1841, had a groundbreaking impact on European political thought, and he examined the influence of the pagan deity known as Odin. Carlyle described the ritual of dying Norse men slicing themselves open in the hopes that Odin would believe they had died in battle, as only the war dead were allowed to spend the afterlife in the mystical hall of Valhalla. As one reads Carlyle's description of Odin as a god of grit, self-sacrifice, and hard work, one is forced to think of the American phrases like "pull yourself up by your bootstraps." American culture is no doubt deeply influenced by Germany. The most stereotypical American foods, hamburgers and hot dogs, Frankfurters, both have Germanic origins. The most common American surname is Miller, often an anglicization of Muller. The religious beliefs of most evangelical Christians can be traced back to the Anabaptists, who were central in the 1848 German Revolution. The very concept of being born again is rooted in the arguments of the German radical Protestants in opposition to baptizing infants, arguing that until adolescence, a child was incapable of truly accepting Christianity. A great deal of American motor-mindedness and entrepreneurial culture is rooted in a kind of Odinist worldview. Americans will say mind over matter, arguing that anything is possible if you just put forward enough effort. Americans will blame those who are economically destitute for their own situation, arguing that if only they had put forward substantial effort, they would not be impoverished. Americans routinely attribute the geopolitical position of the United States to a belief that the country is more hardworking than other nations. A great deal is written about the Protestant work ethic and the influence of theologian John Calvin on American history and thinking. But the influence of the Germanic pagan ethos is rarely explored. However, The American consumerist celebration of Christmas, complete with decorated pine trees, long hours worked by retail workers, running up of credit card debt, and a mythical figure with a long white beard who appears once a year for Yuletide, reveals that Odin is quite well alive, though perhaps deeply buried in the American psyche. Neoliberal economics, promoted by globalist financial institutions, has latched on to this spiritual current among the American people. Milton Friedman was a child of immigrants from Hungary. Ayn Rand was born in Russia. Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich von Hayek were anything but American. Yet the economic theories they pushed were very easily swallowed by the American people. The American culture of hard work pays off and a man's house is his castle became a very welcome host for free market economic theories and parasitical international banking institutions and corporations. The Odinist values of Americans have been channeled to argue for policies of deregulation and full integration of the country into the open international system. As the result of decades of privatizations and deregulations and globalization treaties, the USA is in an overall economic decline. Across the USA, roads are being unpaved because municipalities cannot afford to maintain them. Water is not being properly purified water is not being properly purified. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reports that a number of households across the country are food insecure, with basic nutrition access at risk. The industrial middle class has been eroded by both technological advances eliminating labor and a global race to the bottom, as corporations scour the globe searching for the lowest paid workers. The vast natural resources of the country produce huge amounts of wealth for Wall Street oil and fracking companies, while the people who inhabit the vast territories of the country where oil and gas is extracted become poorer and poorer over the years. While such circumstances in other nations might result in some kind of socialist or nationalist upsurge, blaming the corporations and banks that have swept away prosperity, Americans have largely internalized a kind of Odinist interpretation of their hardships. They watch TV programs talking about rags to riches and Horatio Alger-like stories in which people have become rich by working hard and sacrificing. Americans suffer in silence, believing that they themselves are the ones to blame for their suffering, and only if they work harder and sacrifice more can they become better off. Efforts to understand the economic situation in an overall or collective sense are largely absent among the population. Americans will happily consume books about how to personally save money, to think like a wealthy person. Books on nature of the economy itself and the economic conditions of the country do not sell very well. As their incomes decrease and their lives become less and less stable, Americans increasingly turn to opioids in the hopes of finding some level of solace. The diseases of despair, such as narcotics, alcoholism, and suicide, are claiming the lives of an increasing number of Americans. Neoliberalism, which largely guts and undermines the U.S. economy, has hijacked the work hard to get ahead and go out and make something of yourself sentiments that were once quite a boon to U.S. society overall. However, among younger people in the United States, figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders are certainly popular. These figures have openly called for expanding the U.S. welfare state, guaranteeing education and health care to the population, and imposing a heavier tax burden on the rich. Millennial Americans, who face a much harder economic situation than their parents, are much more sympathetic to social democratic rhetoric. However, a right-wing current remains very widespread in critiquing democratic socialism as being un-American. Those who follow Sanders or Ocasio-Cortez are labeled as lazy, spoiled, pathetic. They are portrayed as wanting government handouts and begging the government to give them stuff for free. The term snowflake, referring to a kind of cultivated oversensitivity among the younger generation by right-wing critics, has become popular. Young people who are attracted to socialism are presented as being simply weaklings who do not understand the Odinist values of grit and sacrifice that once made America great. Some of these criticisms are valid. The majority currents of the contemporary left, largely controlled and crafted by academia, are very much guided by postmodernism, identity politics, and ultrasensitivity. The campus-based activist groups tend to begin meetings with each attendee stating their preferred gender pronoun, and a rhetoric that creates a kind of self-care therapeutic atmosphere in which victimhood is aspired to as an ideal state of being. The right accurately critiques the prevailing left as unleashing sentiments largely rooted in jealousy and resentment, and a desire to tear down those who, quote, have it too good and benefit from white privilege or cisgender hierarchy. However, the overall history of leftism in the United States and the world tells a different story. The history of socialism in America is not limited to postmodern whining about its unfair and calls for an expanded welfare state along with a ban on mansplaining. The socialist current in U.S. history, going back to the 1800s, includes figures like Daniel De Leon, Eugene Debs, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, William Z. Foster, Henry Winston, Claudia Jones, and Huey Newton, among others. These figures, despite being leftist and anti-capitalist, espoused almost the same kind of American and Odinist values of grit, self-sacrifice, and struggle. Their rhetoric included a burning anger, as well as a call for selfless courage and relentless effort to change the world. Furthermore, their vision of socialism was not an expanded welfare state, but rather a centrally planned economy in which the people of the United States were mobilized to reconstruct the entire country along egalitarian lines. When one reads the works of American Marxists from the 1930s and sees how they marveled at Stalin's 5-year plans, one can see a clear identification of an Americanism within it. Anna Louise Strong, the American journalist who became a leading pro-Soviet voice, argued in her memoir, I Change Worlds, that the Soviet construction efforts were the greatest example of the American mindset being applied. During the Second World War, the U.S. Marine Corps popularized the phrase gung-ho, a Chinese slogan utilized by Mao Zedong in the Eighth Route Army, and it means all together and joint efforts. A Hollywood movie called Gung-Ho was produced and circulated, and to this day, American slang refers to having great enthusiasm as being very gung-ho. This, again, shows Americans seeing their Odinist values enacted by communist rather than capitalist and individualist forces. The Odinist spirit of American culture has so far only been utilized by neoliberalism. Free market advocates have effectively presented themselves as the defenders of the American way of hard work and entrepreneurialism. However, as the socialist movement expands and anti-capitalist ideas become more and more popular, socialism will most likely need to adjust and find a way to adapt itself with the motor-mindedness and will-to-power sentiments that are central in the minds of so many working-class people across the USA. Americans believe in hard work, sacrifice, grit, valor, and struggle. Such sentiments are present all throughout the world, and Americans have more than a small streak of these values, but they are hardly unique to our shores. However, the efforts glorified by such values are most effective when they are combined, when nations are no longer held back by the irrationality of greed and the anarchy of production. Whole peoples and communities are capable of being mobilized to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and achieve results that are highly impressive. Collectivism is not inherently a rewarding of weakness, and grit and struggle are not limited to liberal individualism. When groups of human beings pull together, their ability to achieve tremendous results is much greater. If the Americanist sentiments could be combined with socialist economics, the results would be astronomical. And that is an essay published in my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, where I talk about how the right wing, this Odinist sentiment, go out and struggle and work hard and sacrifice, that Odinist sentiment has been hijacked by the right wing. However, it was the same kind of emotions that Stalin unleashed during his 5-year plans, that there is a socialistic side to those sentiments, and that we shouldn't hand over that desire to go out and work hard and achieve something that shouldn't belong to the right wing, right? Entrepreneurialism, The capitalists shouldn't be able to claim that as their own. That's all I was saying. Some people took offense to that essay. They thought I was being over the top or something like that. That's all I was saying. And I reference Huey Newton, and I talk about, anti-racist struggles. I think that we need to remember that the American people, and especially immigrants too, right? People say, well, you're saying the American people, you mean white people. No, I mean immigrants. Those people that have jumped over fences to get here from South America, do you think those folks are weaklings? Do you think those folks just want to sit back and get the government? Oh no, those are hardworking people, right? The immigrant communities that have come here, that is a big part of the United States, right? It's a big part of U.S. history, is people who want to get places, people who want to work hard and struggle and get things done. And the right wing has said that socialists don't believe in that. And they're wrong. Socialists do believe in grit and struggle and sacrifice, but they don't believe that you should gain at the expense of somebody else. That's the difference. There's nothing wrong with getting rich, but nobody should ever get rich by making someone else poor. That's the point of socialism. And yes, when socialism comes to America, we are going to work hard. We are going to go out and we are going to build new bridges, build new high-speed trains, invent new computer systems. We are going to work hard and struggle. And when we do it, the whole country is going to become wealthier, right? Socialism is about going out and working hard and building and struggling, but doing it in a way that benefits all of society. Not tearing somebody else down, not plundering, not exploiting people. Building up so that a rising tide can lift all boats. That's what socialism is about. That's what socialism is about. Socialism is when whole countries pull themselves up by their bootstraps and sacrifice and struggle to build a better life for their kids and for their community. Socialism isn't about hating America. Socialism isn't about hating your country or your community. Socialism is about loving your country and your community so much that you say that greed can no longer be tolerated. Racism can no longer be tolerated. An unfolding low-wage police state can no longer be tolerated. It is about being so dedicated to building a better life for your kids, for your community, for your country. It is about trying to make a better world and being willing to go out and struggle and sacrifice to do it. Now, Kinky says, the more you offend Caleb, the more you're getting through. Own it. Well, thank you, Kinky. It needs to be said, right, that socialism is not about, it's not for weaklings. I would say that the right wing that sit back and say, screw everybody, I don't want to pay taxes. I don't want to, I don't care if the country falls apart as long as I'm being taken care of. That is a weakling attitude. But socialists are people that take responsibility. They take responsibility for the future of their community, for the future of their country. There's nothing more adult. There's nothing more mature. There's nothing more responsible than being a socialist. The way socialists are portrayed by the right wing, they have got it completely wrong. They are the snowflakes. They are the snowflakes if ever. It's socialists it is the socialism that built Russia and China into global superpowers. It's the socialism that made Cuba what it is with their medical volunteers all over the world. It's the socialism that has made, Bolivia the country with the highest GDP growth rate in all of South America. It is hard work, struggle, and sacrifice for the benefit of all. It is responsibility. It is getting rich, but getting rich in a way that doesn't make somebody else poor, right? And that needs to be said. And we should not hand over Odinism, the Odinist feelings. We should not hand it over to Ben Shapiro. We should not hand it over to Jordan Peterson. We shouldn't hand it over to Tucker Carlson. They don't own that mentality, right? They do not own that mentality, right? And capitalism, American entrepreneurial sentiments don't belong to the capitalists. They don't. They really don't. And especially socialism for the 21st century involves business owners and entrepreneurialism. I've talked about Nicaragua.